Subscribe to Man Told for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. He said just one thing, one sentence. And after 20 years, I couldn't stay silent anymore. My son's wedding day, the day that was supposed to be the happiest, turned into the moment I finally stood up and said it all. The air in that ballroom turned heavy. Warm yellow lights spilled over the elegant tables. Soft music played somewhere in the background. Glasses clinked. But inside my head, there was nothing. Just emptiness. I was sitting in the far corner of the room, calloused hands gripping a small ring box. The wooden box was chipped at the edges. Inside were the wedding rings his mother left behind, before she walked out, when he was only 3. I've carried it with me ever since, like a scar that never heals. Across the room, my son, in his navy blue suit, was smiling, eyes shining as he looked at his bride. That look stopped me cold. Everything I've ever done in my life was just so I could see that smile. I thought I would just sit there quietly, eat a piece of cake, drink a glass of wine, and leave. That's all. But life never gives me things that easy. Then he stood up, her father, tall, broad-shouldered, with that face of someone born to command. He took the mic, his voice deep and steady, starting with the usual well wishes. I didn't even look at him, not until he turned my way. And the next sentence, every word dropped heavy onto the cold wooden floor. Strange, isn't it? A man who's spent his whole life cutting wood, and somehow he still ends up sitting in this room with us. A few scattered laughs broke out. Knives and forks tapping plates sounded like blades cutting through skin. The air froze solid. My son went pale. His hands clenched tight. His lips trembled. He wanted to say something, but he didn't. I put my glass down, slowly. Inside my chest, my heart was pounding slow and heavy, like a hammer striking wood. And then I stood up. No one saw that coming. Every eye in that room turned to me. I took one step forward, my voice low but steady. You just reminded me why my wife left, and why I've stayed silent for the last 20 years. But tonight, my silence ends. In that moment, the whole room went dead quiet. And that was just the beginning. They say a man only knows how strong he really is when there's no one left to lean on. I learned that was true when I was 28, the year my wife walked out that door, leaving behind a 3-year-old boy, a tiny backpack, and a pair of swollen red eyes. He wrapped his arms around my leg, crying so hard he could barely breathe. "Dad, where did Mom go?" I didn't know what to say. All I could do was pick him up, hold him close. And right there, in that moment, I swore I'd never let him feel abandoned ever again. From that day, we started from nothing. In the daytime, I built furniture for hire. At night, I took any job I could find, hauling boxes, sweeping out warehouses. There were nights I came home drenched in sweat and sawdust, my back so sore I thought I wouldn't be able to stand up again once I lay down. But every time I opened that door, I'd see him sitting on a chair, barely keeping his eyes open, still holding his little toy car, waiting for me. I'd smile, pull him into my arms. Our dinners were simple, sometimes nothing more than a piece of stale bread, or a slice of cold pizza bought cheap at the end of the day. He never complained. He just asked, innocent as ever, "Dad, how many tables did you build today?" I'd smile and lie, "A lot." And he'd believe me right away, his eyes lighting up like I'd just told him a bedtime story. Some days were so hard we almost lost this little wooden house. Debt piled up. The landlord knocked on our door nonstop. I still remember one night, I was so tired I fell asleep at my workbench. When I woke up, I saw he had taken that thin blanket and put it over me. He was curled up on the floor, hugging that tiny toy car, fast asleep. That night, looking at that small figure on the cold floor, I made myself a promise. No matter what it costs me, you will never have to sleep on the floor again. On weekends, we had a little ritual. We'd walk to the edge of the woods and take pictures of trees with strange shapes. Later, those photos became inspiration for my furniture. Sometimes he'd draw on paper, messy little sketches, and say, "One day, I'll open a store. I'll put all these tables in it, and you won't have to work anymore, Dad. You'll just sit and relax." I'd laugh, but my eyes would sting. And then, somehow, he grew up, taller than me before I even noticed. And in his eyes, there was still something I never want him to lose, that quiet belief that no matter how poor we are, he's never alone. Then one day, he brought a girl home. That day, I found myself fussing around, trying to make this old wooden house look a little less poor. She was polite, bright eyes. I looked at them and thought, maybe my boy finally found his piece of luck. I never got in the way of his love life. I just stayed behind him, hoping he'd be happy. But when I heard about her family, a quiet uneasiness started to creep into my heart. At first, all I felt was joy. My son talked about her with a voice I'd never heard before. He said she believed in his dream of opening a woodworking shop, that when he was with her, he felt respected. I listened and thought to myself, maybe, finally, luck has found its way to our door. Then one day, he took me to meet her family. The restaurant was so fancy, I had to look at the menu 3 times before daring to pick the cheapest dish. I wore the newest shirt I owned, but I could still see the waiter glance at me, just to make sure I hadn't walked into the wrong place. Through the entire dinner, Richard, her father, never looked at me for more than a second. When I mentioned my small woodworking shop, he smiled, calm and polite, and said, "You're good with your hands, but life must be pretty hard for you, huh?" It sounded casual, almost light, but I felt my son's hand tighten under the table. His face flushed red. I reached over and touched his hand, just to say, "It's okay. Don't worry about me." After we left the restaurant, he walked next to me in silence for a long time. Only when we were a few blocks from home, he whispered, "Dad, I don't care what they think about you. I just don't want you to feel hurt." I put my hand on his shoulder, swallowing something heavy stuck in my throat, and I said, "I'm fine. As long as you're happy, I'm fine." In the months after that, her family took care of almost everything. The venue, the food, the guest list. Polite, thoughtful, but with every decision, I could feel them pushing me a little further away. Once, I offered to pay for a part of the wedding. Richard just smiled. "Don't worry about it. We'll handle everything. You just show up on the day." His words chilled me a little inside, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to do anything that would make things harder for my son. The day he brought home the work contract, a job offered by her family's company, I saw the weight in his eyes. He said, "Dad, I want to sign it. I want to prove to them that I can stand on my own." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Just remember one thing, son. Happiness doesn't come from a signature." He hugged me, and I could feel him trembling. In the last few nights before the wedding, I stayed up late in my shop. I made a small table for the two of them. On the tabletop, I carved these words, "Where there is love, there is home." Each stroke of the chisel was a piece of memory. The nights we both fell asleep on the couch, those quick meals we shared, and all the times we laughed so hard our stomachs hurt. All I wanted was to sit quietly that night and watch my son happy. Just that, but as it turns out, even silence has its ending. I started to realize I was slowly disappearing from my own son's wedding. One afternoon, while helping the organizers check the guest list, a task they gave me because it was quicker than making phone calls, my eyes stopped at one spot. Next to my name, there was a red mark, like someone had crossed it out by mistake and then wrote it back in. But the names of my closest friends, the ones who had carried me through the hardest years of my life, were completely gone from the list. I stayed quiet, folded the paper, said nothing. But inside my chest, something sank, like a wooden plank splitting from the inside. The invitations went out. That's when I learned I'd been placed at the very last table, right next to the door. No one explained. They only said, "It's just how we arranged it. Please don't think too much." I nodded. But another scratch carved itself a little deeper inside me. One night, I heard my son outside in the yard. His voice low, tense. "No, I haven't told Dad yet. I know, but my dad's not like everyone else. Don't worry about it." I stood there in the dark, my hand gripping a rag still covered in sawdust. For the first time, I heard my son having to explain me to someone else. When he walked back in and saw me, I just smiled and patted his shoulder, like I hadn't heard a thing. Then one afternoon, while I was halfway through cutting a piece of wood, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, no one was there. Just an envelope lying quietly on the step. Inside was a copy of that contract, the same one my son had mentioned, but now with a new clause. 3 years of financial binding, which meant he'd be entirely dependent on her family's company. At the bottom corner, in fine slanted handwriting, it said, "Ensuring stability after marriage, R. K." I sat down. Sawdust drifted off me, falling to the floor. Every part of me wanted to rush to my son, tear that paper apart. But I looked at my hands, hard, calloused, trembling, and I knew I couldn't act out of anger. That night, I called him out into the yard. I didn't show him the contract. I just looked straight into his eyes. "Are you sure this is what you want?" He bit his lip, stayed silent. Finally, in a shaky voice, he said, "Dad, I just want everything to go smoothly. I don't want you to worry." I sighed, heavy like a saw dragging through old wood. "Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself." And in that moment, I saw it so clearly. Something in his eyes that looked like fear, and a quiet, desperate longing to be free. After that, things only became clearer. At the dress fitting, they politely asked me to step outside and take pictures instead. My friends crossed out one by one. No one said a word. Every little detail, like nails being hammered in, one slow hit at a time. The night before the final rehearsal, I sat alone in my shop. The small wooden table I'd been making for them lay silent in front of me. The yellow light stretched my shadow across the cold cement floor. Outside, wind slipped through the cracks in the door, icy cold. I put my hand on the smooth wooden surface and closed my eyes. And in my head, one question kept echoing, a question I could no longer push away. How much longer can I stay silent? The rehearsal day finally came. I put on the cleanest shirt I had and drove myself to the venue. The hall was bright, packed with staff rushing back and forth. I stood at the entrance for a moment, looking around, trying to figure out where I belonged. "Excuse me, sir, who are you?" one of the staff asked. I told her my name. She checked the list, then pointed to the last row. "You can sit over there for now. We'll get to the seating arrangement later." I nodded. Inside, another cut. The rehearsal felt like a performance. Her family discussed everything: flowers, music, lighting. I just sat there quietly, watching. When the MC read the list of people giving speeches, I heard it clear as day. My name wasn't on it. My son glanced my way, eyes full of apology, helpless. I shook my head slightly, telling him, "Go on, just keep going." Then came the wine-pouring practice. The bride and groom stood side by side. Her parents walked up to the stage, glasses in hand. I stayed far away, like some accidental guest. Someone from their side whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Good thing everything's being handled properly. If they had to plan it themselves, who knows what a mess it'd be." I heard, but stayed silent. When almost everyone had left, I walked along the tables, already set for the wedding day. On the card with my name, my seat was exactly where they'd told me. The very last table, right by the door. I placed my hand on the card. It felt cold as steel. Then Richard stepped up behind me, his voice calm, but every word hammered in like a nail. "You see now, everything's in its place. On that day, you'd better stay in your seat. Let's not have any unfortunate scenes." I turned around and looked straight at him. "What do you think I'm going to do?" He shrugged. "I'm just reminding you, that day is for our family. Outsiders should know their place." Then he walked away, leaving behind the cold smell of his cologne. I stood there, my hand still on that card. That night, when I got home, I didn't sleep. In my shop, the wedding table I'd been working on lay silent. I picked up the carving knife. Each trembling cut sank deep. Every mark I made was another pain swallowed whole. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I went straight to my son's company to see him. He froze when he saw me. I said, "Can we talk outside for a bit?" We sat in a small coffee shop. The clinking of spoons against cups broke the silence. I took the envelope, the copy of that contract someone had slipped under my workshop door, and slid it across the table. He opened it. I watched the change on his face, from surprise to confusion. "Dad, who gave you this?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But you do understand what all this means, don't you?" The silence stretched long, only the sound of traffic outside. He folded the paper, kept his hand on it, and said softly, "Dad, I'm just afraid if I say no, everything will fall apart." I placed my hand on his. "I trust you'll make the right choice. But remember, happiness doesn't come from this kind of trade-off." I stood up and walked out of the cafe, and as I looked at the endless stream of cars on the street, I knew one thing for sure. This calm lake is only waiting for a pebble, and it will fall, soon. The closer it got to the wedding, the quieter my house became. My son and I spoke less and less. Not because we were angry, but because we both knew some things, once said out loud, would only make the air heavier. A week before the wedding, I got a call from an unknown number, a polite female voice from the planning team. "Mr. Damien, the bride's family just adjusted the seating chart. Could you come by to sign for confirmation so we can finalize everything with the hotel?" I stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, "I'll be there." The next day, I showed up. On the new seating chart, my name was no longer at the last table. It was now a single chair, completely separate, right by the door. The coordinator gave me an awkward smile. They said this would be more convenient. "You'll be by yourself. No one will bother you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I signed, without a word. That afternoon, driving back home, I saw a luxury car parked at my gate. Richard was talking to my son. Their eyes were tight, like stretched strings. When he saw me, he turned, his voice cold as a gust of wind. "This is the last time I'm saying it. If there's anything that could damage my family's reputation, this wedding will not happen." My son's face turned red. "What do you mean by that?" He didn't answer. He just glanced at me, then got into his car. The sound of the engine faded away. I walked into the yard and said to my son, "If you have to sacrifice yourself for this, tell me now. Don't wait until it's too late." He lowered his head, his voice hoarse. "Dad, I just want everything to be peaceful." I looked at him, but deep down I knew this so-called peace was like thin glass. Just one touch, and it would shatter. A few days later, there was a small family gathering. They chose a private, luxurious room at a hotel. I arrived on time, and as soon as I stepped in, a voice said, "Oh, finally, he's here." Everyone was already seated in a big circle. Only one empty chair remained, set apart. At the very end, during dinner, they talked about stocks, trips, business deals. Not a single question came my way. All I heard was cutlery clinking against plates and scattered laughter. Halfway through, Richard raised his glass, his voice clear. "I want to thank everyone for making this wedding perfect. Our family is proud to welcome such an excellent young man as a son-in-law. From now on, everything he has will be part of us." I listened, eyes fixed on nothing. He paused for a beat, then went on. "Of course, in marriage, sometimes you have to accept sacrifices, especially when it comes to the past." My heartbeat quickened. My fingers gripped the glass so hard my knuckles turned white. Next to me, my son leaned over and whispered, "Dad, please, just let it go." I forced myself to put the glass back down, but the sound of it hitting the table came out too hard. The whole table froze for a second. I took a deep breath and stayed silent. The moment had barely settled when one of their relatives, probably drunk, laughed out loud. "Let's just hope that after this wedding, we won't have to keep pretending to be polite with people who aren't even in our class." The whole table went dead silent. My son shot up from his seat, ready to speak, but I put my hand on his arm, holding him back. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead. Dinner ended in a tense, heavy silence. As I walked out of that room, I heard faint laughter behind me, and Richard's voice, low, just enough to reach my ears. "Enduring is an art. Not everyone can do it." I stopped in my tracks. My fingers touched the small ring box in my pocket, and in my head, only one question remained. How long? Can I keep quiet? I walked out of that hotel that night, like a man stepping out of a room with no air. The night air was cool, but I still couldn't breathe. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio, just the sound of the engine, and my heartbeat, slow, heavy. That night, in my shop, the wedding table was almost done. I placed my rough, calloused hand on the cold, smooth wood, and for a moment, it felt like I was staring at myself. One single thought kept repeating in my head: how long am I going to just sit here? The next morning, a message popped up on my phone. "Please confirm. On the wedding day, you just need to be present. No speech is required." A short, polite sentence, but it felt like being erased one more time. That afternoon, my son came home late. He stood at the workshop door for a long while before walking in. Looking at the table, he let out a long breath. "It's beautiful, Dad." I kept carving, finishing the last few strokes. "Are you tired?" I asked. "Tired," he said. "Everything is more than I expected." I stopped, spoke slowly. "If you're tired because happiness is heavy, I can rest easy. But if you're tired because you're being forced, You need to be brave enough to stop." He said nothing, just stood there, silent. 2 days before the wedding, everything finally reached its limit. I loaded the table into my truck and drove to the venue myself. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to give this gift with my own hands. The staff saw me, hesitated, and made a phone call. Moments later, Richard walked out. His eyes swept over the table. Then he spoke, polite but cold. "That's a lot of effort. But I'm sorry, this wedding already has a decoration team. We don't need this here. Please take it back." The room went silent, so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock. The staff nearby avoided my eyes. I tightened my grip on the edge of the table. "This isn't for decoration. It's a wedding gift, something I made for my son." He smiled. "You can keep it at home. At the reception, we don't want anything that doesn't fit the style we've prepared." I looked straight at him. A long pause. Then I spoke, slow and clear. "My silence, my patience, was never because I was afraid of you. It's because I wanted my son to have peace. But don't mistake silence for weakness." He raised his brows slightly, then turned and walked away, leaving me there with the table. That night, my son called, his voice tight. "Dad, I heard what happened. They have no right to do that. I'll talk to them." I stayed calm. "No need. Just remember this. If you don't stand up for yourself, you'll spend your whole life bowing your head." There was nothing on the other end. Then his voice came back, trembling. "Dad, I feel like I'm losing something. Something I don't even know how to name." When the call ended, I knew the day I stopped sitting still is coming. On the final rehearsal day, I came quietly, sat in the back of the hall. My son walked onto the stage, wearing a suit that didn't look like him, his face stiff as stone. In the middle of the music, there was a moment when his eyes scanned the room, looking for someone, but he didn't see me. I sat there in the dark, my hand clenched so tight it turned white. And I knew, this wedding will not go as quietly as they hope. The wedding day came. I woke up early. The house was silent. I put on my old suit by myself, tied my own tie. In the mirror, I saw my face, eyes deep and quiet, and I told myself, no matter what happens today, my son has to see that I'm here. The wedding hall was glowing with lights and flowers. I walked in among guests dressed in luxury. They glanced at me, then turned away like they didn't know me. Someone from the staff guided me to my seat, a single chair, right next to the door. I sat. The sound of laughter and small talk around me felt so far away. The music started. My son walked in, sharp in his suit, his face calm, but his eyes tight with strain. Everything went according to plan. The bride appeared. Applause. Cameras panning across the room. Perfect. Too perfect. Then it was time for the speeches. The MC called up the bride's parents. They walked on stage, gave their thanks. The room echoed with applause. The MC was about to move on when my son raised his hand. They passed him the mic. The hall went silent. Only the faint hiss of the speakers. He stood tall, took a deep breath. The moment stretched like a full minute of holding your breath. Then his voice came, slow and clear. "Before we go on, I need to say something. There's someone who has walked beside me my whole life, and today he's been put all the way at the back of this room. The person I owe everything I have to." The entire room froze. The MC stepped back, clutching the script, not knowing what to do. Richard frowned, starting to rise from his chair. But my son kept going. "If I don't say this today, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Dad, I want you up here with me." Every eye turned to the back of the hall. My heart pounded in my chest. I stood, walked through the rows of seats, each step loud in my own ears. As soon as I reached the stage steps, Richard blocked my way. His voice was low and sharp. "Don't ruin this ceremony." That moment, just a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. Every memory of being dismissed, pushed aside, came rushing back. I looked straight into his eyes, said nothing, and walked past him. My son took my hand. His hand trembled, but he held on tight. His voice, quiet but steady. "Dad, thank you for everything. I'm sorry for making you carry all of this alone all these years." My vision blurred, but before I could say anything, Richard's voice cut through from below, cold and sharp. "That's enough. This is not the place to drag in personal stories." The air turned to stone. My son turned to him. "It's not personal to me. If a wedding can't make room for the father who raised me, then what does it even mean? If my happiness has to be bought with silence like this, then I don't want it. His words fell into that silent hall, like a stone dropped into a still lake. After my son spoke, the packed hall fell into a dead silence. The music stopped mid-note. All that was left was the faint scrape of a chair and the sound of a few deep breaths. The air had turned thick. The MC froze, script trembling in his hands. Richard stepped forward, his voice controlled, but every word sharp as ice. You have no idea what you're doing. Everything today was arranged to be perfect. Don't ruin it because of a moment of emotion. My son turned to him, his voice hoarse but firm. Perfect? A wedding where my own father is pushed to the sidelines. What kind of perfect is that? Richard's hands clenched tight. This is grown-ups business. Don't let your feelings drag you into a mistake. My son shook his head. My biggest mistake was staying silent for too long. I'm not silent anymore. No one even dared to breathe. From the front row, I saw the bride's mother clutching her purse, her eyes full of confusion. The bride stood frozen beside him, her bouquet trembling. My son raised the mic and looked out at the crowd. There's something I have to say. I love her. But this wedding has been turned into a transaction. The contract her family forced me to sign doesn't just bind me. It was written to make my father disappear. The entire hall gasped. Chairs scraped against the floor. Cameras lowered. The room filled with whispers. The bride's eyes went wide. Her lips trembled. She turned to my son, as if to ask if it was true, then turned to her father, her face torn apart. Richard lunged forward, trying to snatch the paper as my son pulled it from his pocket. But he held it high, his grip firm. This is a copy of that contract. My father got it before I did. I was going to stay quiet. But today, I refused to start a marriage with a lie. The hall erupted with murmurs. Some older guests shook their heads. Richard's voice rose, furious. Give it to me. But my son's reply was clear and steady. If my father is not respected, I don't want a wedding like this. I placed my hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. Son, this choice is yours. If you choose to love, then love with everything you are. Not because someone forced you to... He turned to look at me, his eyes wet but bright, a brightness I had waited years to see. Then, in front of everyone, he faced the room and said, loud and clear, if love is treated like a contract, then I'm sorry. I won't sign it. He pulled the mic off, handed it back to the MC, and stepped down from the stage. I walked behind him. When I touched his shoulder, he gripped my hand, father and son, one older, one younger, side by side, walking straight toward the door. Not fast, not slow. Behind us, voices called out. Noise rose up like a wave. But ahead, the doors opened wide. That day, the wedding didn't end the way they planned. But for the first time, I saw my son free. The hotel doors closed behind us. The noise disappeared. Only the cold night wind hit my face. Outside, yellow lights spilled across the stone pavement. My son walked beside me, his breath turning into thin white mist. His suit, once perfect, was now wrinkled. His tie hung crooked. His shoulders trembled, but not from fear. We walked a few more steps before stopping. He let go of my hand and sat down on the steps. I sat next to him. The night was cold. The sound of cars on the road felt far away. Dad, I'm sorry, he said, his voice hoarse. I know today must have been hard on you, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. I shook my head. You did what I couldn't. I'm proud of you. He turned to me, his eyes red. I don't know what's going to happen after this, but at least now, I don't feel like a coward anymore. I put my hand on his shoulder. From here on, you're going to face a lot. People will talk. They'll blame. But if this is the path you believe in, then keep walking. His phone buzzed again and again. The bride's name lit up on the screen. He looked at me, then answered. On the other end, her voice was shaking. Chaos loud behind her. Where are you? Come back? Talk to me. I didn't know anything about that contract. I just wanted to marry you. He closed his eyes. I know, but I can't walk into a marriage where my father is treated like he doesn't exist. I love you, but I can't let love turn into an exchange. There was silence, then the sound of her crying. His voice softened. When you really want to be with me, no contracts, no conditions. I'll be right there. He hung up, lowered his head, pressed his hands to his forehead. I just patted his back. A moment later, the hotel manager came out, breathing fast. "Excuse me, Mr. Richard wants to meet you both in a private room." He said, "It's time to talk clearly." My son lifted his head. His eyes had gone dry. He stood up and said quietly, "Let's go, Dad. I'm done running." We followed him into a small meeting room on the second floor. No stage lights now, just cold white light. Richard, the bride's mother, and a few relatives were waiting inside. Richard stared straight at us. His voice was hard as stone. "You've humiliated my family tonight. You think you've won." My son's voice was steady. "I don't care about winning or losing. I just want my father to be respected. If that breaks this wedding, so be it." The bride's mother spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "You could have handled this privately. Why turn it into a spectacle in front of everyone?" My son turned to her. "We didn't turn it into a spectacle. The way everyone treated my father is what turned today into this." Richard slammed his hand on the table and stood up. "You think love alone is enough. Life isn't that simple." My son didn't back down. "Then I'd rather not marry. I choose love, not selling myself." I looked at him, his back straight, his eyes burning like a light in that cold room, and for the first time, I saw my son, grown. The room fell into silence. The ticking of the clock sounded like a blade cutting through. Richard looked at my son, his voice tight with anger. "You think walking out tonight ends this? Without this family protecting you, you'll be nothing." My son stood tall, answering slowly. "If protection means giving up my dignity, I'd rather stand on my own." The air thickened. The bride's mother placed a trembling hand on the table and said softly, "Richard, that's enough." He froze, both hands gripping the edge of the table. I looked at my son, then spoke. My voice was low, steady. "I don't want hate. I don't want these two kids to suffer because of us adults. I only need one thing: respect. And tonight, I saw clearly who stands with my son and who turns their back." I rose to my feet. My son stood too, his face calm. "We'll be leaving now. From here on, we'll handle the rest on our own." We walked out. The door closed behind us, and with it, a faint, heavy sigh. The hallway was long, lit with cold white light. No one spoke. Not until we reached the lobby did my son exhale. "Dad, I feel lighter." I nodded. Our footsteps echoed evenly on the floor. In the parking lot, the city at night glowed a pale yellow under the streetlights. The damp pavement reflected two long shadows. My son leaned against the car, eyes lifted to a sky scattered with faint stars. "Dad, even if we have to start over from nothing, I know this is right." I looked at him, his shoulders still thin, but steady. All those years of silence, of carrying everything alone, had finally turned into his strength. "Son, from today on, you don't have to prove anything to me. Just live true to yourself. That's enough." He turned to me. His eyes brightened, and a faint smile appeared. The first in months. We drove home in silence. The city slid backward outside the windows, streetlights stretching into long trails of light. The night wind rushed in, cold but strangely gentle. I glanced at him in the passenger seat. His face was relaxed, as if a weight had finally been lifted. When we got home, he stopped at the door and turned. "Dad, thank you for being there. If you weren't, I wouldn't have had the courage to step off that stage." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You stepped down on your own. I just stood still, so you'd know you weren't alone." He nodded, then opened the door and went in. I stayed on the porch, watching his figure fade behind the door. Ahead of me, the night sky stretched wide and quiet, and for the first time in my life, I felt peace. That night, after the door closed behind us, I stayed outside on the porch. The night wind slipped through my fingers, carrying the cold and the damp scent of leaves. The city had fallen asleep, leaving only the faint hum of cars far away. I sat down on the steps. In front of me was the empty yard, and above, a sky full of stars. Inside my chest, it felt as if someone had finally lifted, a weight that had been pressing down for years. Never in my life did I imagine a day when my own son, in front of hundreds of eyes, would pull me up to stand beside him. I had stayed silent for so long, thinking silence would keep the peace. But silence can become a chain. And sometimes, what a son needs isn't a perfect father, but a father who dares to step forward. I don't know what will happen next for him and that girl. Maybe someday, When everything has calmed down, they'll find their way back to each other. Or maybe they'll go down separate roads. But there's one thing I know for sure. Today, he chose himself. I remember myself at his age, a young man who only knew how to keep his head down. I used to think that bowing my head was how you keep the peace. But later I learned, peace built on the cost of your pride is nothing but false peace. I stood and walked inside. The hallway was dark, except for a narrow strip of light spilling out from my son's half-closed door. I stopped there for a moment. Inside, faint sounds. He was probably putting away the things that were supposed to start a different life today. I almost knocked, but I stopped myself. Some things don't need words. From now on, he will walk on his own. In my room, I lay down, unable to sleep. The images from the wedding kept coming back. The noise, the stairs, and that moment when his hand held mine. With that single grip, all my years of silence finally had meaning. Tomorrow, I'll go back to the shop. I'll run my hand over that table I once thought would be the greatest gift I could give him. Now I understand. The real gift was today, the moment he chose to stand up for himself. To be a father isn't to shield them from everything. It's to take a step back so they can see you there and know they are not alone. From now on, he won't have to learn to bow his head the way I once did. Outside the window, the sky was still full of stars, and for the first time in years, a new star rose quietly inside me.